When did I discover my purpose? That's a really interesting question because when I think back to my early 20s, I had moments where I thought, this is what I want to do. You know, women's empowerment speaking. This is what I want to do. This is what I'm called to do. I felt it in my spirit. It was something that was undescribable. Like I can't even explain it. But one time in particular, I was speaking at my church that I was attending at the time. And towards the ending of my talk, I was basically sharing my story. To be quite honest, I didn't even know what I was doing in terms of presenting or speaking. But I was sharing my story as that's what I was asked to do. And towards the ending of that talk, where I was talking about where I was at in that moment, I was basically telling the audience, predominantly the youth. I really wanted to focus on speaking to the youth that were in the congregation. There's like 3,000 people in this church, and I was basically telling them that I am nowhere near where I want to be, but I'm so far from where I was just a year ago. And I remember just in saying that, I felt something. I felt something in my body. There was like this, I mean, I call it the Holy Spirit, you know, some people call it their gut, some people, whatever. I know it was the Holy Spirit in that moment. And I thought to myself, this is what I want to do. This is what I want to spend my life doing. But I had no idea what that would look like. Then there was another time in my mid-20s, I was speaking at a youth prison, and it was a magical day. There were so many tears, so much healing that went on in that room, that happened, that took place, that went down in that space. And it was life-shifting for me because at the time I was still somewhat, you know, 1 foot in, 1 foot out, lukewarm as the Bible calls it. I wanted change. I was changing. So much had changed in my life. I went back to school. I was a part of so many different women's programs. I was hosting my own women's meetup at my home at the time. Like there was just a lot of great things happening, but I was still struggling between this life of purpose and love and happiness and healing and joy and forgiveness. And well, I miss my old life, and I miss my old friends, and I miss doing those old things. So it was still somewhat of a struggle for me. But that day at the youth prison, it was life-shifting. Being able to share where I was at in comparison to where I was when I was sitting in their seats, when I was walking in their shoes, and showing them an example, being a living testimony of what can happen for them if they choose to make different choices, if they forgive and let go, if they just hang on to that little bit of faith, you know, the size of a mustard seed. And as I was presenting, I was emotional, I was crying, they were crying. It was magical. And I knew going home that day, I'm going to do this for a living. I don't know what it's going to look like. I don't know how I'm going to get there. I don't know what I'm going to do to get there, but I know that this is it. I know that this is my calling. Because the thing about purpose is your purpose can change. It can change. You could be doing something, you know, in this moment, and 2 years later, you're doing something completely different, which is your purpose at the time. But it's got to feel, it's got to light you up. It's got to light you up. I mean, from the inside, it lights you up. It'll wake you up in the morning. It'll keep you up at night. It's your thing. And youth empowerment at the time was my thing. That was my thing. It was, and I was doing it for free. I wasn't getting paid to speak. I was speaking in group homes. I was speaking at youth organizations, youth shelters, and I was doing it for free. But the real confirmation came after emergency brain surgery. That was when I knew for certain that this is what I wanted to do. So I did a lot of speaking for free in my 20s, not thinking that this could actually be a career. Like I could do this full time. I could really do this, and I could make enough money to not have a backup plan or a 9 to 5. My 30s, I spent most of my 30s speaking for a little bit of pay. It wasn't like a legitimate business, but I spent a lot of time hosting my own events. So I was hosting a lot of conferences and seminars and workshops, and I did that from my early 30s right into, my 40s now. But I started doing it early. It wasn't like I started hosting my own conferences or my own events when I became a paid speaker. I started hosting my own small little workshops and gatherings and meetups in my 20s, and then in my 30s, I hosted my very first women's conference. It was right after, or during my separation, actually, a few months after my separation. I was actually living in a women's shelter, a family shelter, when I hosted myself and my good friend Vanessa Wiedel when we hosted our very first women's conference. And there was over 200 women there. And that was another confirmation from God telling me, this is it, Elizabeth. This is your calling. This is what you're supposed to do. And that day was as magical as the day at the youth prison with the young woman. We did an altar call, and I can't tell you how many women came up for healing, came up for prayer. We had Ruth Lewis, a minister, speak that day. She did the keynote that day, and it was life-shifting for so many women. So many women received some form of healing and word that just shifted their life. And even if it was a small shift, it was magical. I knew that day, again, this is my calling. I still am not quite sure what I'm going to do with it, but I know this is it. Then I published my memoir, and that really confirmed and gave birth to my speaking business. So not really speaking hobby or something I loved doing or passion. That gave birth to my speaking business. My memoir, it's a 400-page, almost 400-page memoir, gave birth to my speaking business. I started getting invitations from all over the city and even within the US to come out and speak for pay. That was it. That was when the journey of being a paid speaker really started for me. It was after my emergency brain surgery. There's no turning back. And then speaking gave birth to coaching. And I love coaching, but speaking is definitely my first love. It's my first love. You know when you're speaking to a group of people, whether it's 10 people or 100 or 1,000 in the audience, the impact just feels and seems so much greater. You know that you are literally transforming lives. Not just the people who are in the audience who are sitting there, but they're now going to take that information, what you've given them, and they're going to go out into the world and they're going to contribute to the healing of the world in their way. I know that this is 100% my calling. There's nothing else. There's nothing else. Helping and inspiring women and girls to use their story, their pain, to create greatness in the world is, it's what I'm here to do.